Hello everyone. So let me just get this from current slide. Okay, so next we're going to look at calligraphy. So calligraphy becomes very important in Islamic art. From the beginning, Arabic language and script have been revered in Islamic society. As the language of the Quran, Arabic is a powerful unifying force. From the 8th through the 11th centuries, it was the universal scholarly language of Muslim lands. And it really becomes this kind of glorifying art within the Islamic culture. And just like with illuminated manuscripts that we were looking at earlier, the Quran was originally written on vellum, as paper was not yet readily available, and vellum is made out of calf skin. So let me show you an example here. Move this. Move it maybe more over here. And so here we have, this comes from Syria for the 9th century. Okay, and it's really beautiful, this kind of early calligraphy like this. And if we jump ahead, here's another example of calligraphy. This is a type of white pottery from the 10th century, and it's decorated with a kind of calligraphy called Kufic. And it's a very early form of script that is used for this. And it translates, I think, to something really beautiful. It says, "Knowledge, the beginning of it is bitter to the taste, but the end is sweeter than honey." So, you know, when you're learning something new, sometimes it's really hard. But then when you get it and you understand it and you can use that knowledge, it's sweet. It's, you know, it makes you feel really good. So we see that also calligraphy is used, you know, in objects that we for like everyday use. Then we have the later Islamic arts in Persia, Spain, and Turkey. And so in the 11th century, power in the Islamic world fell into the hands of a more or less independent regional rule. The Turkic people from Central Asia who converted to Islam in the 10th century. The Seljuks first conquered Persia in 1037 to 1040, establishing a dynasty that lasted until 1157. The Seljuks established a dynasty, as I just said, and then in the West, in Spain, engaged in constant warfare with the Christian armies that would end only in 1492. And I will show you the next image here. We have this really beautiful example here where I'm showing you a courtyard view of Kibal Izwa, and this is in Isfahan, Iran. It dates between the 11th and the 18th century. It's one of the most famous mosques in Iran. It's a place I've actually always dreamed of going to and have yet to make it there. It's just absolutely a gorgeous piece of architecture. So let's just look at it. First of all, you'll notice that this is a doorway down here. Here, that's a doorway. So realize how large this structure is, and even this structure is, if this is like an actual doorway that is still pretty big. You can imagine standing next to this. You have your dome, you can see here. And these kinds of things, like I said, we can see this direct correlation between the Islamic art that I'm showing you this week and the Byzantine art that I'm showing you. So just like in the Byzantine architecture, in the Islamic architecture, we have domes as well. We have these slender towers here, which are our minarets. And again, you'll have minarets that then at certain times of the day, somebody will climb to the top and they'll call out the devoted to come to prayer. And in certain cases, they're also used as watchtowers. to not only watch over people, but it's for people to watch them and have the sense of always presence of God in their lives when they look and they're able to see the minarets, these tall minarets. And we'll zoom in on some of this, but you can just see the amazing arabesque patterning that's used throughout this. And then there's calligraphy that's also a decorative element that's used throughout this. And one of the reasons I love this kind of architecture from this area of Isfahan is because this is in Iran, where this technique of this blue tile work was created and really perfected. And it's, to me, it's just so unbelievably stunning. And to have such a large structure made out of it, it's just, I don't know, it's just, like I said, one of the places I really would love to go at some point in my life. Now, before I move forward, I want to point out one other thing, and it's very interesting because it influences Western architecture, and that is the arch here. So we've had the use of the Roman arch, right, the rounded Roman arch. We've seen that for a while, but when you look at this, you'll see that this arch is actually pointed. So what we have is, we have the Crusades from Western Europe come into the Byzantine world and into parts of what we would say is the Middle East today. And they encounter these pointed arches in areas like Isfahan. And they're taken. They're like, wow, these are really beautiful pieces of architecture. And they take this idea of the pointed arch back to Western Europe, and they start to implement it in the building of their churches and their cathedrals and stuff. And when you get back on the western side of Europe and looking at it, it's the introduction of this pointed arch and some other forms of architecture that mark the end of Romanesque and the beginning of Gothic. So we'll see this back and forth between these different areas of the world, really influencing one another for their art and their architecture and their culture as well. So here's a plan of above of the mosque, and so we see, again, we have this dome right here, this really large dome, and we have the central courtyard, and another minaret down here. So we have all the very standard, let's say, architectural features of a mosque that is located here. And then we have here, this was actually from a school originally, and now it's here in New York City at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and you can go see it. Is, again, this kind of tile work that I just find absolutely gorgeous. And we have, this amazing blue that's offset with the complementary color of orange here. Complementary colors are blue and orange, red and green, violet and yellow, and they're colors that are directly opposite on the color wheel, so they go well together. And we can see here we have calligraphy written here, and we have calligraphy in here and calligraphy in here. So it's definitely become a decorative element within this art. And then we have this star that we see repeated throughout Islamic art and architecture, and it forms this kind of arabesque, again, patterning that's here and elsewhere. Now, these structures are placed in various buildings. Like I said, this is technically originally from a school. And what you would do is, at certain times of the day, you're praying, and you're praying towards this. And it's there within the building to orient you into the right direction, because no matter where you are in the world, you are supposed to pray towards Mecca. So this helps you to know, like, do I pray east, west, north, south? It would just depend, like, where you are. So when the buildings are created, whoever the architect is, he or she figures out, where do these people then need to pray, and they put in spaces like this to indicate that. So now we're going to jump over to Spain. And in Spain, as I explained, the Islamic armies come into Spain and they take over most of Spain and Portugal for a while. And we have some really amazing architecture that has been left behind. And this is one of them. This is called the Court of the Lions in Alhambra, Granada, Spain, from 1354 to 1391. Now, here's an interesting thing, because I keep telling you, no animals, no people, right? But now in this courtyard, we have these famous lions holding up this fountain, which is why it's called the Court of the Lions. Well, this is a palace, actually. So this is not a religious building. So this is why we are seeing something like this, where we have an animal here. What I find really amazing is that they've taken, with this piece of architecture, the idea of the arabesque, but they've made it three-dimensional. They've made it into a relief carving in the walls here. So this is, you know, really, really beautiful. And the columns are so slender that, and then with this thicker part on top, that it looks again like we have this lifting up. This, your eye, it almost looks like it's defying gravity because of this. And we have this reference automatically to this idea of heaven, to this idea of God. And when we enter into the palace of the lions and we look up in the dome, this is what we see. So it's a very different take on a dome from what we've seen in other pieces of architecture. And it's actually based on a beehive. So it's a more organic kind of, let's say, structure in the way it's made. And to me, again, it looks like they've taken elements from the arabesque patterning, but they've made them three-dimensional. If you remember back to Hagia Sophia, you have the row of windows on the top. We have our row of windows here, right, which we can make a reference back to the clerestory back in Greek and Roman and Egyptian architecture. But in this case, we take on, once again, the star here, the star shape that we see so prominently featured in Islamic architecture. So I need to stop here. I'm going to run out of time, and I'll come back with another video and we'll talk about the Ottomans.